Mary Robin Matthews was born on April 27, 1956, to Doyle Matthews and Vanetta Matthews. She grew up in Kingman, Kansas, in a religious household with her two sisters, Danetta and Monica. Known for her vibrant and carefree personality, Robin preferred to go by her middle name. She was friendly and loved spending time with others. At a young age, she met Douglas Walter, who also hailed from Kingman. They married in 1974, and Robin became Mary Robin Walter. Soon after, they had their daughter, Pamela. With dreams of being successful, Robin and Doug moved to Great Bend, Kansas 2 years later. They settled in a mobile home in the rural area of Great Bend. Doug had planned to pursue a career in insurance but eventually gave up that profession and instead went to work at his uncle's service station. Meanwhile, Robin enrolled herself in college to pursue nursing due to her fondness for helping people. Along with her studies, she also took up a job at the Great Bend Manor Hospital. For 4 years after moving to Great Bend, Robin was enjoying life at ease. On one side, Robin was raising her daughter alongside her husband, Doug, who was exceptionally supportive. Then, on the other side, she was really excelling in both her studies and work. However, she had no idea that her life was going to hit an abrupt stop very soon. January 24, 1980 was a regular winter morning for the Walter family when Doug headed off to work. The first red flag came that same morning when Robin missed her afternoon nursing class, which was extremely unusual for her. The situation got weirder when Robin did not pick up their daughter, then 5-year-old Pamela, from the babysitter's house at 3 p.m. like she was supposed to. Unaware of these events, Robin's husband Doug went to a private club to hang out with 2 of his friends after finishing his work hours. It was 6:40 p.m. in the evening when Doug returned to their mobile home in Nelson Trailer Park, located near the Great Bend Municipal Airport, with a friend. Inside the home, the men discovered a grisly scene, as 23-year-old Robin's lifeless body was discovered in a pool of blood in her own bed, lying face up. In a state of shock and with a broken heart, Doug reported the incident to the local police station. Deputies from the Baton County Sheriff's Office sent the corpse to the coroner's office for an autopsy. While they began scanning the house for clues, they found the murder weapon, which was a .22 caliber pistol, which originally belonged to the Walters. Autopsy reports revealed that Robin had been shot 12 times in her neck, chest, abdomen, and arm. It was concluded that the gun was loaded and emptied twice during the shooting. When Doug was questioned by police regarding his assumptions about the person responsible for his wife's death, he could not come up with an answer. He was unable to think of someone who could be so cruel to Robin, who was loved by everybody. He also let the investigators know that due to their living in a safe neighborhood, they never locked their doors and always left the keys in the car. They could have never anticipated the evil that was lurking around the corner. The investigators were also baffled by the apparent lack of motive for the murder, as there was no evidence of sexual assault or robbery in the home. After a thorough investigation, detectives zeroed in on a person of interest but could not make an arrest due to the lack of evidence. But they did not publicly name the suspect at the time. Therefore, the case went cold, and remained so for over 40 years while Robin's family mourned her loss. For decades later, in April 2022, while recovering from COVID, Detective Sergeant Adam Hales from the Barton County Sheriff's Office reopened the Gold case. After taking a fresh look at the case, Detective Hales discovered some incriminating information, some of which had been overlooked in the original investigation and some of which was added at a later date. As additional investigators joined Detective Hales on the case, the team started interviewing multiple witnesses across the country who were involved in the original investigation. The Kansas Bureau of Investigation also joined to assist in the investigation. In October 2022, after building a case based on the newfound evidence, detectives submitted the case to the attorney of Martin County Courthouse for review. After approximately 4 weeks of review, an arrest warrant was obtained for the murder in a second-degree charge on the suspect, who was finally identified as Robert Hanks. Hanks was a neighbor of the Walter family at the time of Robin's murder. It was still not clear why Hanks became a person of interest in the first place, but he definitely had a long criminal history. Just a year after the murder, Hanks was arrested and charged with rape, aggravated battery, aggravated robbery, and aggravated burglary. He was convicted in 1983. and served about 10 years before being paroled in 1993. Detectives concluded that Hank, who was 25 at the time of Robin's slaying, broke into the Walter home and gunned down Robin on the fateful evening of 1980. On December 8, 2022, Barton police arrested now 68-year-old Robert Hanks from Oxford, Kansas. This arrest is the oldest homicide arrest in Kansas history. Hanks is being held in the Barton County in lieu of a $500,000 bond. Sadly, many of Robin's family members could not see this day. Robin's mother passed away in 2012, and her father soon followed in 2015, while Doug passed away just a year earlier in 2021. Robin Walter's daughter, Pamela Walter Cooper, told the media that the family had always suspected Hanks of her mother's murder, even though he was not convicted of it until this year. She further expressed that she is curious to know if he is remorseful for his actions. However, even if that is not the case, she personally had forgiven him a long time ago. Before we proceed, I've got an exciting surprise for you. We've launched a brand new channel dedicated to intriguing content such as old historical mysteries, cold cases, and particularly chilling horror stories perfect for bedtime. Drop a comment letting us know if you're a fan of horror stories or not. You can find the link in the description below. Let's find out who will be the first to explore it. Alright, let's dive back into the video. Akia Eggleston was born on September 6, 1994, in Baltimore, Maryland, where she grew up. Her mother, Latina Wilkinson, raised her as a single parent until her stepfather, Sean Wilkinson, came into her life. Akia formed a close bond with Sean since her biological father was absent. Sean worked at the Department of Labor. From a young age, Akia was known for her bubbly and feisty personality. She always prioritized others over herself and was a beloved friend to everyone she knew. Her stepfather described her as someone who was universally adored and eagerly anticipated by others. Despite her small size, Akia actively participated in various activities, with dancing and singing being her favorites. She absolutely loved and put all her energy into dancing and entertaining people. Her happiness seemed to have faded away in 2012 when Akia's mother passed away from cancer when Akia was only 17. Having a close bond with her mother, Akia felt lonely after her demise, prompting her to be rebellious against her stepfather. However, over the years she picked up the pieces of her broken heart and learned to cope with her loss. Whom Akia considered her own father was there for her through all of this. At the age of 20, Akia gave birth to a beautiful daughter. Despite being so young, she was a great mother to her child. Even though the child's father wasn't in the picture, she took all the responsibility as a single mother. She was always seen playing, dancing, and goofing around with her daughter. In 2017, at the age of 22, Akia became pregnant again, and this time with a boy. Weirdly enough, she decided to hide the identity of the unborn baby's father from her family. Nonetheless, Akia was thrilled to have her second baby. However, the pregnancy was not easy for her. The pregnancy was considered high risk due to her baby lying in a breech position inside her womb. While her due date was in June 2017, by May, 8-month pregnant Akia could barely walk. She was on bed rest and under the surveillance of the doctors at a Baltimore area hospital where she sought medical help on a regular basis to monitor the pregnancy. Despite these difficulties, she did not want to be a burden on her family and lived in a shared apartment at 606 Cherry Crest Road in the Cherry Hill section of Baltimore. To celebrate the pregnancy before her difficult delivery, Akia, along with her family, planned a baby shower that was scheduled for May 7th. For months, Akia planned for this event and had even put down a $900 deposit. The last update before her baby shower and gender reveal party her family had was on May 3rd. Akia was planning to get her hair done on that Friday, and she was supposed to pick out her and her daughter's dress. As expected, she was really looking forward to the party. On the scheduled date of May 7th, while friends and family gathered for the party, Akia was nowhere to be seen. Her family began to get concerned when she did not arrive even after 2 hours. Fearing that there might be a medical emergency, Akia's family went to her apartment to check on her. Unfortunately, she was not there either. Family members and friends then searched the area surrounding the residence but came up with nothing. After waiting for a few more hours, the family reported her missing to the local authorities. When detectives from the Baltimore Police Department arrived at Akia's residence, they found no signs of forced entry into the apartment. Family members told the investigators that certain items were missing from the apartment, including clothing and a dresser, but other old furniture and kitchen items were left behind. Oddly enough, on the drywall in Akia's room, 3 triangle-shaped punctures were discovered. As the investigation moved forward, detectives tried to find clues about her whereabouts. When they pulled the data from her phone, they discovered that shortly before her disappearance, Akia wrote on her Facebook wall that she missed her mother. Detectives also learned that May 3, 2017 was the last time anyone had heard from her. Akia exchanged messages with one of her friends telling her that she was moving to a new place with her unborn baby's father, whose identity was still hidden from the family. Where Akia could be seen withdrawing money on May 3, 2017, at around 12:52 p.m. Wearing a green t-shirt and black joggers, Akia made a $450 cash withdrawal from her account. Based on a message on Akia's phone, detectives theorized that the money was for the down payment of her new place. This was the last time when the expectant mother was seen alive. Detectives were not considering the theory that Akia was in any kind of danger. Instead, they believed that she moved away on her own. Yet Akia's family was adamant that there was something wrong, as they were sure she would never abandon her daughter like that. The family further insisted that with her pregnancy, it was practically impossible for her to move the furniture alone. However, authorities failed to find anyone that helped her with the process. Authorities also put out an alert to local hospitals as Akia, who would have needed the help of doctors to deliver her son due to her high-risk pregnancy. But no such cases were ever reported, leading Akia's whereabouts to remain a mystery. As time passed, detectives started to consider the possibility of foul play. Detectives questioned many people, including her friends and family, but no leads were found. The unborn baby's father, who was supposed to move in with Akia, was also interviewed. However, the police neither revealed his identity nor declared him a suspect. Akia's family held a vigil for her approximately 6 months after her disappearance, outside of her former apartment. As they were cleaning up, a friend spotted a bank card belonging to Akia underneath the brushes near the front door. The bank card, which was in good condition, looked to have been placed there by someone, as police had not found it during previous searches. Although police collected the card as evidence, no new clues could be extracted from it. Over the years, multiple search attempts have been conducted for Akia's remains in several places in Baltimore, but to no avail. The suspicious circumstances of her disappearance had garnered national attention from various media outlets, but none led to any evidence. In November 2017, a reward of $25,000 was also announced for any information regarding the missing mother, but eventually this also failed to provide any answer. The case would remain cold for 5 years until a review of the cold case cracked the mystery wide open. With the help of interviews, social media messages, and financial and telephone records, the Baltimore Cold Case Review team was finally able to construct a timeline regarding her disappearance, which eventually led them to a suspect, Michael Robertson, none other than the father of Akia's unborn son. Akia had met Robertson as a young child in 1990 when his grandmother babysat her. They reconnected years later at the birthday party of a mutual friend in 2016 and began dating shortly thereafter. However, Robertson, who was 35 years old at the time, was also involved in a relationship at the time with another 22-year-old woman with whom he had 2 children. After he got Akia pregnant, he got evicted from the apartment he shared with the mother of his 2 children. Akia had told several friends that she was planning to move in with her child's father while keeping his identity hidden. It was discovered that Robertson lied about wanting to move into a new place together, sending her a picture of a property. Police later questioned the property owners and discovered that they were never contacted by Robertson. Detectives also discovered that an argument had taken place between Robertson and his other mistress, who he had children with the night before Akia's disappearance. And cell phone records show that Robertson was the last person with Akia. Yet he lied about his last meeting with Akia and changed his story several times during the police interviews. But at the time, investigators did not have enough to hold him accountable. Additionally, investigators learned about the internet search history of Robertson's. He had conducted internet searches about trash pickup, dumpsters, and landfills in Baltimore. This information suggested that Robertson disposed of Akia's remains in a dumpster around Baltimore. But even after extensive searches, Akia's body was never located. On February 1, 2022, a now 41-year-old Michael Robertson was arrested and taken into custody. He was charged with 2 first-degree murders of Akia and her unborn son. If convicted, he could face the maximum penalty of 2 life sentences. On the early morning of July 17, 2007, at about 1:20 a.m., the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Department received a chilling 911 call. The call surmised a landlord confessing about a fatal altercation with his tenant. When deputies arrived at the Nature's Trail mobile home park, they were greeted by a bloody crime scene. The park was located off Morris Bridge Road at Thono-Tasassa in Hillsborough County. Jonathan Burns, who was 43 at the time, co-owned the park while also living within it. He repeated the story to the deputies of how he got into an altercation with his female tenant, which led to her tragic death. Burns claimed his tenant attacked and stabbed him and showed 2 knife wounds to his abdomen as evidence. Deputies found the lifeless body of the tenant, who was identified as 41-year-old Tanya, and she had been stabbed 4 times in her chest, along with a large laceration to her neck. A potential blood trail was located in the area of a trash bin, which was only about 29 feet away from the dead body. The blood trail ended inside the Burns home. Upon searching the home, investigators also discovered the murder weapon inside in the form of a bloody knife. As Burns was taken to the hospital, Tanya's body was taken to the medical examiner's office to perform an autopsy. Doctors from the Tampa General Hospital, where Burns was taken for his injuries, concluded that his mid-abdomen knife wounds needed surgeries to heal. Other than knife wounds, both of his arms were covered with scratches along with small lacerations on his fingers. The results of the autopsy performed on Tanya's corpse concluded that she died from fatal stab wounds to the chest that penetrated her heart and lungs. If Burns' account was to be believed, it was a classic case of self-defense. However, there were some anomalies in this version of the story that raised suspicion in the minds of the investigators. Forensic tests performed on the murder weapon and the blood found on the ground at the crime scene suggest that both of the items matched Burns' DNA profile. However, contradictory to Burns' story, it was concluded that Burns' blood was not found near Tanya's body, and Tanya's blood was not found near the dumpster. Detectives further learned that Tanya regularly used a walker and a wheelchair to cope with her disability, and she was mostly unstable to stand on her feet. This condition made her incapable of attacking someone with the intent of serious injury. As investigators were having a hard time believing that Burns killed Tanya as a desperate measure of self-defense, they wanted to prosecute him with the murder charge. However, when the case was presented to the state attorney's office, the report concluded that there was insufficient evidence to refute Burns' version of the events. Unfortunately, without any solid evidence against the man responsible for Tanya's death, investigators came out empty-handed and the case went cold. It would take 14 years for the mystery to be solved. Last year, in 2021, the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Department Cold Case Unit began reviewing the case in the hopes of finding new clues. After closely looking at all the circumstantial and physical evidence, a detective went to Burns' home on January 14, 2022 and interviewed him about the events surrounding Tanya's stabbing. Once again describing the details of that fateful night, Burns told the detective that he had been drinking heavily that night when he heard Tanya yelling at him. At first, he walked to the laundry room to close it, then made up his mind to confront her. He claimed that he walked over to her mobile home and Tanya punched him in the stomach. Burns said he did not notice anything at the moment, but soon panicked, realizing that he was bleeding. He further said that Tanya was not armed with any type of weapon and never took his knife, yet he said she had somehow stabbed him. Apparently, detectives could tell that Burns was lying. However, as they started to strategize as to how to build a strong case, they got an unexpected breakthrough. More than a week after that interview, a witness contacted the sheriff's office, saying that she had information on a cold case from 2007. During an interview with a detective, The witness said that Burns had approached her in the mobile home park just after the detective left on January 14, 2007, and told her that he knew he did something wrong. He further claimed that he was confessing because he wanted to face it. The witness also said that Burns told her he knew Tanya was disabled at the time of her demise. The witness said Burns provided her with a signed letter containing the details of the incident, which she passed on to the detective. Just 2 days later, the police department reviewed one more call from the witness. The witness said that this time Burns had approached her and told her he wrote the letter in an attempt to prove that he was acting in self-defense, as he figured he would get less time for a self-defense case rather than a first-degree murder. However, the witness also shared that Burns told her that he did not regret killing Tanya as she only got what she deserved, indicating a hatred towards the deceased woman. On January 28, 2022, the witness gave the detectives a second statement, allegedly written and signed by Burns, but it contradicted the first statement. There were many discrepancies between what was contained in the letter and what he was telling the witness verbally too. In February 2022, the witness contacted the detective yet again and said that Burns had given her yet another statement after she confronted him with the contradictions between the letter and his verbal account. During the confrontation, the witness's son was also present at the scene, and they both asked Burns how he was stabbed. That he noticed Tanya while walking to the laundry room. Intending serious harm, he returned home to get his knife before walking over to talk to her. Burns said an argument led to them fighting over the knife. And when Tanya tried to go home, he stabbed her several times and cut her throat. He then stabbed himself in the stomach after the incident to frame a self-defense scenario. Burns went on to provide the witness with a third written statement, saying it contained the truth. Burns ended the letter with an admission that he already had hatred in his mind towards Tanya, which prompted him to deliberately hurt her that night and ended up killing her. The details in the third statement were consistent with evidence collected at the crime scene. According to the affidavit, and investigators matched a latent fingerprint on one of the statements to Burns. In a statement he said, "This was a terrible tragedy that I am responsible for. I wish I could change it." Whether the remorse was fake or not, on February 3, 2022, authorities took him into custody and charged him with Tanya's murder, dragging him to the path of justice he should have faced long ago. Janet Ferris, 69 years old, was a mother of 2 and a grandmother of 5. On October 1, 1992, she left her home in Mill Bay on Vancouver Island to drive to Innisfail, Alberta, for her niece's wedding. She stayed at her sister's house in White Rock, British Columbia, on the first night of her journey before continuing onward. 2 weeks later, Janet's family received a call from relatives in Alberta asking why she hadn't shown up for the wedding. Janet was missing, and the investigation started 2 weeks late. The last transaction on Janet's credit card was at Tappan Esso Serve and Grocery near Salmon Arm, British Columbia, where she bought gas. Her family searched the highways in the area, and volunteers combed the ditches along them. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police was in charge of the aerial search, using helicopters to search for Janet. No sign of her or her car was found. Griffin Lake is just off the Trans-Canada Highway, roughly 18 miles west of Revelstoke. The Moiseenko family operates Griffin Lake Cabins and Resort on the northwest end of the lake. On August 20, 2019, some of their guests asked them about an incident they had recently heard about that had occurred 10 years earlier. They had read an article online about 2 teenagers who had been awarded the Governor General's Award for Bravery after rescuing a family whose van had gone into Griffin Lake in June of 2009. The guests asked the Moiseenkos if their van was still in the lake. The Moiseenkos did not know because they had not owned the cabins at that time. They sent their 13-year-old son Max out on the lake with the guests when they took their boat out to investigate. Approximately 10 feet offshore, the group did see what appeared to be a vehicle roughly 15 feet below the surface of the water. They assumed that it was the van from the 2009 accident, and their curiosity was satisfied. The guests left later that day. The following day, August 21st, a Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer came out to the cabins to have a picnic with relatives of his who were staying there. The topic of the search for the van in the lake came up, and Nancy Moiseenko, Max's mother, asked the RCMP officer why the vehicle had never been removed from the lake. He told her that it had been. He then told Nancy to make a report about the vehicle in the water. 2 RCMP officers came out to the lake to investigate. Since Max had seen the vehicle, they took him with them when they went out on a boat to see it for themselves so that he could show them where it was. The vehicle was not visible from the boat that day, however, and swam down far enough to take a video of the vehicle with his GoPro to show the RCMP officers. 3 days later, the vehicle, a 1986 Honda Accord, was pulled from the lake. Inside the car were the remains of Janet Ferris. To help deal with their grief and the uncertainty they felt as a result of Janet's disappearance, her family had spent the previous almost 27 years believing that she must have run off the road, trying to avoid hitting an animal, or after falling asleep at the wheel. Where Janet's car was found obviously supports this theory, but further physical examination of the car and the lack of damage indicative of the car having been hit by another vehicle before going into the water also led the RCMP to announce that they did not believe that any criminal actions were involved in the accident. The Trans-Canada Highway runs right alongside the lake in the area where the car was found. Today, there are concrete barriers to help prevent cars from going into the lake, but they were not there in 1992. The road was also much more narrow than it is today, so Janet's car could have rolled down the hill into the lake, even if it had gone off the road even slightly. The Ferris family and the RCMP have both expressed respect and gratitude for Max and the role he played in finally solving the mystery of what happened to Janet. "My dad and my uncle and our whole family are so thankful to him," said Erin Ferris Hartley, Janet's granddaughter. The family is considering visiting Griffin Lake and meeting the Warenkas in the spring or summer of 2020. RCMP Corporal Thomas Blankney hopes that the solving of Janet's disappearance will empower others in the community. "That's what we say to the public," he told the Times Colonist. "They are our eyes and ears out there. You never know when you make that phone call what it can lead to, and it certainly paid off in this case." Before we continue, 90% of you haven't subscribed to our channel, so if you like this video, please subscribe. It motivates us to make more content for you. Okay, let's continue. In October 1999, Viktor Moiseenko traveled on a train from Minsk to Esipoviki in Belarus with his 4-year-old daughter, Yulia. During the journey, Viktor had a drink and fell asleep. When he woke up, he found his clothes stained with blood, and Yulia was missing. Later, DNA tests revealed that the blood on Viktor's clothes wasn't Yulia's. There might have been some kind of altercation that Viktor couldn't recall clearly from the train ride. The circumstances surrounding Viktor losing Yulia would place a great deal of suspicion on him during the subsequent search for her. A nationwide search was launched for Yulia, and her devastated mother, Ludmila, passed out flyers and train stations all throughout Belarus. Ludmila and Viktor spent days riding the train back and forth between Minsk and Osipovichy, asking passengers if they had seen Yulia. They also checked in shops, wells, and deserted buildings all along the route between the two cities. After 2 years with no sign of Yulia, the family moved. The house they had shared with their youngest daughter was close to a train station, and the passing trains were too painful of a reminder of their missing daughter for Ludmila and Viktor to bear. Yulia's case was reopened in 2017, with the police still suspicious of her parents. Both Ludmila and Viktor took and passed polygraph tests. The renewed effort still did not provide the Moiseenko family with any answers, although they remained hopeful that they would one day find Yulia. Then in 2019, Viktor and Ludmila received word from the police that there was a woman living in Russia who may have been their daughter. The woman traveled to Belarus, and DNA tests proved that 24-year-old Yulia Garina was in fact Yulia Moiseenko. Yulia had somehow ended up in Russia, in the city of Ryazan, some 500 miles away from where she had last been seen. 2 police officers found her alone in a train station there, sometime after she had gone missing. The 4-year-old was able to tell the police her first name and the first names of her parents, but not their last name, because she had a book from a library in a nearby town with her when she was found. Authorities assumed that she was from the area, and she was never connected to the missing persons case in Belarus. While Yulia has no strong memory of her disappearance as an adult, when she was found, she had memories of being on a train with a man and a woman. After they got off the train, the 3 of them slept in abandoned buildings, begged for money, and tried to avoid the police. The man and the woman have never been identified. With no one claiming Yulia, authorities sent her to a foster home that cared for children while they waited for a placement in an orphanage. Yulia was fortunate enough to never make it to an orphanage. Irina Alpatova was a pharmacist who lived in Resen. One of her sons was born with serious medical problems, and Irina made a promise that she would take in an orphan if he were to live. Her son survived, and she went to the facility where Yulia was being held, and told them that she would raise any one of the children that lived there. She was given Yulia. Yulia took her adoptive family's name of Garina and grew up in Ryazan. When she grew up, she went to school to be a pharmacist like Garina and had a daughter of her own. Her family was always honest with her about how she came to be with them. Over the years, based on the fact that as a child she described being with a man and a woman, Yulia began to believe that they had been her parents, and that they had abandoned her. Hoping that her birth family had lost her instead, she researched missing persons cases online, hoping that she would be the subject of one. However, like the police had when she was a child, she worked under the assumption that she was from Russia and never came across her case in Belarus, which reinforced her fears that she had been abandoned. Yulia's boyfriend, Ilya, however, had more luck in his own research, and eventually stumbled upon Yulia Moiseenko's case. He and Yulia reached out to the local police in Belarus and received the Moiseenko's phone number and some pictures of them. Looking at the pictures, she was sure that these were her biological parents because of the physical resemblances she shared with each of them. Shortly thereafter, she received a phone call from her biological sister, who had gotten her phone number from the police. She was also able to speak to her biological parents for the first time in 20 years during that phone call. She learned that she had not been abandoned as she had feared, but had instead been frantically searched for by loving parents who had her taken from them. Yulia was reunited with Viktor and Ludmila at a police station in Belarus, where the DNA samples that would ultimately prove that she was their daughter were also taken. The reunion was full of tears from the parents and their daughter. Viktor begged Yulia for forgiveness for losing her, which she gave him. The family stayed together and talked until 3 in the morning, when Yulia and her boyfriend had to travel back to Russia to be with Yulia's daughter. Yulia does not have plans to move back to Belarus because of the ties she has in her adopted hometown of Ryazan. She does now, however, receive a good morning text message from her parents in Belarus every single morning. 40-year-old William Moldt was a quiet man who was not much for socializing or drinking. On the night of November 7, 1997, however, he went out to a nightclub where he had a few drinks. He called his girlfriend around 9:30 p.m. to tell her that he planned to leave to come back to their home in Lantana, Florida, shortly. Around 11 p.m., he left the club in his white 1994 Saturn. According to witnesses, he did not appear to be intoxicated when he left. William never arrived home, and it will be almost 22 years before his disappearance was finally solved. On August 28, 2019, Barry Fay was driving from Fort Lauderdale to his home in Wellington, Florida, when he received a series of screenshots from one of his neighbors. The screenshots were from Google Earth and showed the pond behind Barry's house. But Barry's neighbor had been sent the screenshots by her ex-husband, who had been looking at his former neighborhood on Google Earth. Barry's neighbor asked him if he thought a white shape in the pond, visible in the screenshots, could be a car. He did. Barry could not see anything from the shore of the pond when he got home. He had never seen anything unusual in the pond in the 14 months he had lived in his home in the Grand Isles neighborhood, even though he spent a lot of time in his backyard working on his landscaping. And the water level in the pond had gotten very low during his time living in the home. Barry then asked another one of his neighbors to fly his drone over the pond. The drone's camera seemed to confirm that there was a white car submerged in the pond. Barry then called the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office. The sheriff's office arrived at the pond at 6:40 p.m. and had to work until midnight to pull the vehicle out of the water. It was a white 1994 Saturn. Inside were the remains of William Moldt. The teardrop-shaped pond where the car was found currently has houses on 2 sides of it, and a road on the other, with a guardrail preventing cars from driving off the road and into the pond. None of these things were there in 1997, however, when the Grand Isle subdivision was under construction. None of the homes in the subdivision were constructed until 1998. When William Moldt went missing, the community only consisted of roads and ponds, and the guardrail had not yet been put in place. While the car was quickly tied to William, it would take an additional 2 weeks for the medical examiner to confirm that the bones found inside the vehicle were his, and finally solve the 2-decades-old disappearance. August 28, 1995 was the Monday before the first day of school for Peter McCall. The 16-year-old was going into his junior year at Berkeley High School, where he was an honors student and a member of the varsity crew team. Peter loved music and reading on a wide variety of topics from astrophysics to poetry. Peter's mother, Susan, had asked him to go to breakfast with her at Fat Apple's restaurant, a local establishment in Berkeley, California, but he had turned down the invitation. Around 9 a.m. that morning, he told his younger brother Joseph that he was going to take a bus to Cody's Books, a bookstore on Telegraph Avenue, and he left the house. He never came home. When Peter had not returned by 11:30 that night, his family reported him missing. Missing flyers with Peter's picture soon were up all over Berkeley, and Peter's friends and family had canvassed the city streets. On the Saturday following his disappearance, more than 100 volunteers searched the various parks in the East Bay Hills. The most promising clue came from a bus driver who said he saw Peter board his number 43 bus the morning he went missing. He claimed that Peter asked him for directions to Montclair and for the time. The bus driver saw him speaking to a young woman with red-streaked hair. Peter got off the bus in downtown Berkeley to transfer to the number 51 bus to get to Montclair. The young woman stayed on the bus. Peter's family is unaware of any reason he may have had for wanting to go to Montclair. The bus driver also claimed that he had seen Peter later that day in Montclair while he was on his lunch break. Peter was with a young man who was clean-cut and had an English accent. Peter approached the bus driver to ask for change. Peter's older sister Rebecca is slightly skeptical of this second sighting. Rebecca and her father were able to confirm at least one detail of the bus driver's account of his first interaction with Peter, the identity of the girl with the red-streaked hair. She turned out to be a teenager named Nicole who coincidentally also went missing that day. However, she turned up after 3 days, having run off to Southern California with a boyfriend, and had spoken briefly on the bus because they had recognized each other from school. They were acquaintances and not friends and only spoke briefly, so Nicole had no information on where Peter was going. A cab driver came forward, claiming to have driven Peter to the Oakland airport with a teenage girl. Peter's family extensively searched flight records to see if Peter had boarded a plane that day. They could not find any indication that he had, so this tip is generally considered to be a misidentification. 2 sightings of Peter place him still in Berkeley later that day. An employee at a Goodwill in downtown Berkeley believes Peter was in the store that day and purchased a shirt. The employee recognized Peter because he had shopped in the store before. 2 girls who went to school with Peter were sitting in a bus stop around 4 p.m. and believed they saw him sitting in the back of a passing number 43 bus. This would have been the line that Peter needed to take home, but he was past the stop he needed to get off at in order to get there. Several religious groups had been recruiting around the campus of the University of California, Berkeley, where Peter's father was a professor of environmental studies in 1995. According to Peter's family, he loved to read about and discuss topics such as philosophy and religion. He was known to stop and talk to and debate with people about their beliefs. Peter's family got in touch with several support groups for parents whose children had joined some of these groups. None of their research ever found any proof that Peter had left to join one of these communities. Peter did not seem prepared to leave for more than a few hours, as all he had with him were the clothes he was wearing. $100 in cash was found left behind in his desk. Peter had recently passed his driver's test, but his license had not come in the mail yet. Would not arrive at his house until a few weeks after his disappearance. If he had planned on running away, he may have needed cash and an ID to facilitate his travels. The McCall family no longer lives in Berkeley. Peter's brother lives in San Diego, and his sister and parents live in Washington State. The family still actively investigates Peter's case, checking online databases, keeping in contact with the police in Berkeley, traveling to different states, and meeting with members of various religious groups Peter may have joined. While they have so far been unable to find their son, Peter's parents have used their experience to try to help others. They run a 3-bed respite foster care facility out of their home in an effort to help troubled teenagers like the ones they encountered while searching for Peter. Janelle Bradford was a 17-year-old honors student at Wilkinsburg High School in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She was quiet but funny and social but focused on her studies. She had a love for basketball and attended Bible study at a local church. Janelle's father had never been a part of her life, and she had lost her mother when she was just 5 years old. Her mother passed away from cardiac arrest following an asthma attack. Janelle was therefore raised by her maternal grandparents with whom she was very close. On April 27, 1999, Janelle, who was just 2 weeks away from turning 18 and 2 months away from graduating high school, attended school as normal that day and then headed on to her after-school job at the Wilkinsburg YWCA on Ross Avenue. She was seen walking home after her shift, but she never arrived there. Janelle has been classified by police as an endangered runaway, although there is little evidence supporting this classification other than the fact that she was a teenager when she went missing. Janelle had no history of getting into trouble, and she had a good relationship with her grandparents. Her friends did not believe that she would have left willingly, especially considering how excited she was for her senior prom. That event was fast approaching, and Janelle had made extensive plans for it. Janelle's behavior did begin to change prior to her disappearance, according to her grandmother. After Janelle went on visits to 2 colleges she was interested in attending, she was not as concerned with high school as she once had been. She missed assignments and did not spend as much time studying. If Janelle met someone at one of these schools who introduced her to negative influences, this could support the theory that she ran away. Janelle simply stopped putting effort into high school, knowing it was almost over. As it stands, we do not have any proof that Janelle ran away, and the possibility that something happened to her on her walk home that night in April of 1999 still exists. In 2016, an age-progressed image was released to show what she might look at age 35. Her case remains open. In May 1994, 18-year-old high school senior Kendra Hall, known as Clea to her friends, lived with her family in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. She was an honor student at Watson Chapel High School and was enjoying a busy and joyful month. Clea had recently attended her senior prom and was just weeks away from graduating. She was also slated to give a speech at the graduation ceremony. Clea had big dreams of becoming a pediatrician and had been accepted into the pre-med program at Tennessee State University in Nashville. Outside of her studies, Clea had earned a summer internship at a pediatrician's office in Boston due to her outstanding academic achievements. To help cover the costs she would incur traveling to Boston and to help pay for her college classes in the fall, Clea had wanted to work part-time. A friend of hers had a job doing clerical work for a local nonprofit that supported local in-home daycares. When she needed to leave the position, she had told Clea about it. The friend's employer was a man named Dr. Larry Amos. He ran his nonprofit out of an office in his home, which was only a few blocks away from where the Hall family lived. When Clea told her parents about the position, they were open to her accepting it because it was in their neighborhood. They agreed to let Clea take the job as long as it did not interfere with her schoolwork or her obligations to their church. Since Clea did not have her own car, they also insisted that her mother drive her to and from work because they did not want her walking alone, especially when she was coming home in the evenings. On May 9th, as a senior, Clea was let out of school early. She had plans to go to work early since she had extra time and hoped to earn a little extra money beyond her normal paycheck. Clea's mother, Laurel, drove her over to the Amos house as planned, but no one was there. They came back home and Clea took a nap. Just before 5 p.m., Clea's employer's wife called her and told her that she was home, so Laurel drove Clea back over. Laurel watched Clea go inside before she drove home. It would be the last time she saw her daughter. Laurel spoke with Clea on the phone that night around 8 p.m., but she was not finished with work or ready to be picked up. Laurel remained at home waiting for a call from Clea asking for her ride home. Laurel fell asleep on the couch while waiting, just before 10 p.m. Clea's father returned home from work at approximately 12:45 a.m. on May 10th. He saw his wife sleeping on the couch but did not wake her up until after he went into Clea's room and saw that she wasn't there. The Halls called Dr. Amos right away. Clea never worked past 10 p.m. And according to Dr. Amos, she had signed out on her timesheet at 8:30. The Halls waited up all night for Clea, hoping that perhaps she had gone to a party in her first real move of serious teenage rebellion. When she was not home by morning, they called police. The police told the Halls that they would have to wait until Clea had been missing for 24 hours before they would take a missing persons report. Their report was finally taken at 5 p.m. on May 10th. The police in Pine Bluff were not quick to investigate the case, even after they finally took the report. For the first few days after Clea disappeared, they assumed she had simply run away. The Hall family, however, knew that Clea would not have done such a thing. The Hall family therefore launched their own efforts to find Clea. They, along with their church community, began their own searches of the area on May 10th, starting with the search of the wooded areas near the Amos home. The Hall family also covered their neighborhood in missing persons flyers with Clea's picture and bows made out of pink ribbon. However, many of them disappeared. At first, the family thought that the utility company may have removed them because they did not want the flyers on the utility poles. They later learned that they had been removed by local teenagers. The teenagers had taken down the missing persons flyers and bows Clea's family had put up around the neighborhood, because they had been paid to do so by Dr. Larry Amos, Clea's employer. Dr. Amos is considered a person of interest in Clea's case due mainly to the fact that he was the last known person to see her. While Clea's mother Laurel has not accused him of being involved in Clea's disappearance, she believes Dr. Amos has not done enough to eliminate himself as a suspect. She is concerned by the fact that he will not take a polygraph, and his overall lack of cooperation in the investigation is alarming. He gave a brief statement after Clea went missing, but that has been the extent of his involvement in the search for Clea. He had left for an out-of-state business trip on May 10th and therefore had not been available to give a statement to the police until the Saturday after Clea vanished. In addition to paying teenagers to remove flyers for Clea, Dr. Amos also removed some of these flyers himself. Clea's father, Willie, witnessed him doing so. Dr. Amos is giving different accounts of the last time he saw Clea over the years. Her timesheet shows that she signed out of work at 8:30. In one statement, he says he did not see her leave but heard her go out the garage. In another statement, he says he saw her as she left the house with a can of peach pop in her hand. In both of these stories, Clea left without informing Dr. Amos that she had completed her work for the day, which was not her normal routine. Dr. Amos' wife, Patricia, would admit to police that this was odd. Dr. Amos originally agreed to allow police to search his home. However, he got into a disagreement with a detective when the police showed up to conduct the search and rescinded his consent. Since the police did not have enough evidence to get a search warrant, they ended up with nothing more than the cursory glance around part of the home that they got when they first arrived there. The Amos home would not be fully searched until 2012. Two individuals who had done work inside the home over the years came forward saying they had seen suspicious things inside the home. One claimed to have seen blood spatter on some insulation, and the other claimed that there was a spot in the home that gave off a terrible smell and had flies swarming around it. These statements were enough for a judge to grant a search warrant for Dr. Amos' home. On March 29, 2012, police spent approximately 6 hours searching the property. During the search, Dr. Amos told authorities that he had 8 sets of renovations performed on the home in the time since Clea went missing. Given the extensive amount of work that had been done on the home and the passage of 18 years, the odds of finding useful evidence were slim. However, the Pine Bluff Police Department did find some items that were potential pieces of evidence and would require forensic testing, and removed them from the home. Those items were not submitted to the crime lab for 40 days after they were collected, however. After a month of not hearing anything about the evidence, Laurel Hall went to a city council meeting asking the council to put pressure on the police department to examine the evidence. She was assured by the police chief that the evidence was being checked on with the crime lab weekly. However, the same day after the council meeting, the Arkansas State Crime Lab released a statement saying they had never received evidence from the search. A Pine Bluff Police Department crime scene technician would later admit that she had forgotten to submit the evidence to the crime lab. She was suspended without pay as a result. When the evidence was finally tested, it did not reveal any signs of blood or anything else useful to the investigation. In the 25 years since Clea went missing, her family has remained active, both in searching for her and in commemorating dates such as her birthday and the anniversary of her disappearance. Laurel Hall has given numerous media interviews over the years in hopes of reaching someone who may have information about the case. Clea is now an aunt, and her 3 nieces all have a portion of her name in theirs. Her nieces and nephew all take part in the various events and remembrances the Halls still hold for Clea every year. Family holds a balloon release. This event is not just an act of remembrance. However, it is also an attempt to spread information. A card with information about Clea and her case is attached to each balloon. My husband and I will not stop looking until we have taken our last breath, Laurel Hall promised in 2019. Andrea Adler, a 37-year-old woman from Kensington, Maryland, was found on September 8, 1987, by construction workers near a motel in Herndon called Dulles-Dezen. She was discovered naked on the ground in the motel's parking lot, a shocking and disturbing sight for the workers. Upon closer examination, it became apparent that she was not breathing. Emergency services were alerted immediately, and Fairfax County Police Department detectives and paramedics arrived swiftly. Despite their efforts to revive her, Adler tragically did not survive. After ensuring that they had done all they could to bring her back to life, the body was transported to the hospital for autopsy. Finding her body in the parking lot and in such a state was a mystery to detectives. Questions were asked, but they couldn't get anything tangible that could be of help. It was as if no one had seen or heard anything. Surprisingly, Adler's vehicle was found by the detectives abandoned on Dulles Toll Road. This is an area which is about a half-mile away from the motel. The reason why she had abandoned her vehicle remained unclear, and detectives could only speculate. They believed she had encountered problems with her car, and due to this, she had left it behind. The autopsy that was conducted revealed that she has been hit with an object in the head, and this had caused her skull to fracture and led to bleeding inside her brain. All this information was not solid enough for detectives to work with. They knew that there were still a lot of gaps that needed to be filled. Who her killer was remained a question that could not be answered. The investigation into her death was leading nowhere, and detectives from the Major Crime Bureau's Cold Case Squad, who were assigned to the case, grew more frustrated with each passing day. Adler's body was eventually laid to rest, and whoever killed her continued walking around freely. 15 years later, this same killer would strike again. This time around, the victim was a 19-year-old teenager by the name of Jennifer Landry, and this second homicide occurred in Mount Rainier, Maryland, which is about an hour drive away from the town of Herndon. Jennifer was originally from Randolph, Massachusetts, and on July 31, 2002, she suddenly went missing without a trace. A few weeks after this, on August 15, 2002, her body was found around 9 a.m. in the 3600 block of Oak Lane in a wooded area. Just like Adler, she was also found naked. Apart from this, another thing that caught the attention of Prince George's County police detectives who responded to the scene was the electrical cable cord that was wrapped around her neck, hands, back, and feet. There were several injuries on her body, and one that stood out was the gaping wound on her neck. It was obvious that whoever killed her had slashed her neck open. An autopsy later revealed that she had also been strangled. In addition to this, there was also a stab wound on her abdomen. Detectives did not also fail to notice that tattoo on her left ankle. It was of a kangaroo wearing boxing gloves. Her body was eventually removed from the area, and an investigation into her death began immediately. This was undertaken by Sergeant Greg McDonald and some other detectives of the Prince George's County Police Department. However, the investigation was hindered by something. Jennifer could not be positively identified. With no name and no idea where she came from, there was little that detectives could do, and the investigation slowed to a crawl. Sketches of her, as well as of the tattoo on her body, were released to the public. She was described by the police as a white blonde with blue eyes and a height of 5 feet 5 inches. All of these were done with the hopes that someone would recognize her and come forward with vital information, but nothing came up. Things would remain like this until June 2005, when a police officer from Massachusetts recognized the kangaroo tattoo. He notified the Prince George's County Police Department of this, and through fingerprint analysis, they were able to finally confirm Jennifer's identity. It was a step in the right direction, but detectives were still in the dark about who her killer was. Nothing else came forth for a long time, and the case went cold. In 2010, the Mount Rainier Police Department received an unexpected letter that helped ignite renewed interest in Jennifer's murder. The letter had come from an inmate that was serving life imprisonment in the Red Onion State Prison located in Virginia. The name of the inmate was Charles Helm. According to the content of the letter, he claimed to have knowledge about the death of Jennifer. This was enough to pique curiosity in the minds of detectives, and they wasted no time in pursuing what they felt was a potential lead. They met up with Charles in the prison where he was and tried setting up an interview with him, but much to their surprise, he declined to speak with them. It wasn't something they had considered would occur, and they had no idea what had prompted the sudden change. There was really nothing that could be done since they could not force him to talk. However, they busied themselves with unraveling as much as they could about him, and a look at his criminal history revealed that he had a really dark past. Charles was in prison for the murder of a 37-year-old mother of two by the name of Patricia Bentley. Before her death, she and Charles had been in a romantic relationship. To make ends meet, she worked as a bus driver for London County School. Her oldest son, who was named Anthony, was 16 at the time, while the younger one was only 8. Around November 2001, Charles moved into her house at Brookfield and began living there. This living arrangement would not last for long because the relationship hit the rocks. By January 2002, Charles packed his bags, moved out, and went on to live with another woman. However, for some reason, he left some of his clothes behind at Patricia's house and still occasionally went back there to make use of her treadmill. Patricia was obviously not pleased about this because at some point, she poured paint on his car during one of his such visits. On April 6, 2002, a friend of Patricia by the name of Alicia Robinson realized that she had not heard from her. The two had planned to go shopping on that day, and it seemed as if Patricia had totally forgotten. At the time, Patricia's two sons were spending the weekend at Rose Bentley's place in Centerville. Rose was Patricia's mother. When Alicia called Patricia's phone to remind her of the plan, she discovered that it was unreachable. This worried her, since it was unusual for such a thing to happen. She immediately called Patricia's mother at Centerville to inform her of the situation. After this, she got into her car and drove down to Centerville to pick up Anthony. She did this because she had a spare key to his mother's house. On getting back to Patricia's house at Brookfield, Theo lighted from the car and made their way to the front door of the house. This was unlocked by Anthony. In the bedroom, they found Alicia face down on the floor. Bruises covered different parts of her body, and the phone and extension cord that had been used to strangle her to death laid a few feet away. The autopsy that was later conducted on her also revealed that she had been hit in the head by an object. Charles immediately became a prime suspect in the murder. However, he denied having a hand in her death. He also claimed he had not seen her for a long time. The truth was eventually discerned with the help of forensic analysis. His DNA was found on her breast and abdomen. In addition to this, cell phone data placed him close to her residence on April 5th, which was a day before her body was discovered. With all these out in the open, Charles can no longer deny the truth. He was arrested on September 18, 2002 and locked up to await trial. The first trial ended up being rendered invalid before a verdict was reached. A second trial was also conducted, but it went the same way as the first. However, the third trial saw the jurors finding him guilty of first-degree murder, and on October 3, 2002, he was handed a life sentence. Detectives would also discover that Patricia's murder was not the only crime from his past. In 1966, he married a woman by the name of Denise Custis. However, the marriage did not last for long due to his habit of physically abusing her. At the end of 1996, she packed her bags and left him for good. But for some reason, he came after her the following year and beat her so badly that she ended up passing out and also suffered a fracture to her cheekbone. As if that weren't enough, he then took her in his car to a motel where they both checked in. But after seeing that she wasn't in a good state and was bleeding from the mouth, he drove her to the hospital for medical treatments. Charles was eventually charged with assault and kidnapping and served time from 1997 to 2001 in a federal prison in Lompoc, California. It was after this release from prison that he met Patricia and started a relationship with her. After uncovering all of these details about Charles's past, detectives were simply astonished. They did not doubt that he truly knew something about Jennifer's death. They felt that if anyone was to point them in the right direction about the murder, it was definitely going to be him. But since he had chosen to remain tight-lipped, they could only wait patiently and hope that he changed his mind. In 2017, almost 7 years after the first letter, Charles wrote another letter to detectives. The content was similar to that of the first one. When detectives reached out to him again, he refused to talk. This was a very frustrating period for the detectives as they felt they were being led in circles, but they did not relent. He initially refused to speak to our detectives. Prince George's County Police Chief Malik Aziz said, "Detectives didn't give up. They tried again to interview him in 2021. This time he agreed. A date was chosen for the interview, and in September 2021, Charles finally sat down to talk with detectives. During the interrogation, he held nothing back and revealed that he was the one that killed Jennifer. He told the detectives that he had picked her up from Washington, D.C. after she had agreed to sleep with him in exchange for some cash. He then drove her to Oak Lane in Mount Rainier, where he killed her and left her body where it had been found. After this confession, detectives knew that they had finally solved the case, but they could not help being shocked by what they had just heard. However, that was not all. Charles also hinted at the 1987 murder of Adler, who was found in the parking lots. However, he did not further elaborate on it. Jennifer's surviving family members were contacted and given the news that her killer had finally been found. In October 2021, barely a month after Charles's confession, detectives from Fairfax County Police decided to speak to him again. They wanted to know what he knew about the 1987 murder of Adler. When he was interrogated, he admitted to also killing Adler and even went as far as giving details that only the killer would have known. Detectives were stunned. They cannot believe their ears. It was a big day all around, Fairfax County Commonwealth Attorney Steve Descano said. "I was personally really happy and relieved and grateful that we can bring this to a close," he added. In January 2022, Fairfax County Grand Jury formally charged Charles with the murder of Adler. A week before this, Prince George's County Cold Case Unit detectives also issued an arrest warrant for him for Jennifer's murder. Sadly, both of Ige's parents died never knowing what happened to their daughter, Fairfax County Police Chief Kevin Davis said. "We hope this indictment brings some sense of closure to her surviving family members and friends," he added. Descano also said the following during a press conference that was held after Charles's indictment. "In a case like this, he's already serving a life sentence. He is not going to ever walk the streets free again. Barring some incredibly unusual circumstances out of our control, it's not about a sentence. It's my opinion that we have an obligation to a community, to the family of a victim, to really take these cases seriously and do them the same way. Because when the justice system is functioning as it should, and particularly crimes as serious as this one, our work is really more than about the length of the sentence. It is about what we say to the community and how the community feels." In December 2022, Charles pleaded guilty to the murder of Adler and was handed another life sentence. An agreement has been reached to transfer him to Maryland, where he will also plead guilty to Jennifer's murder. This would see him as being slammed with another life sentence. He is also expected to serve the remainder of his life sentence in Maryland. At the moment, detectives are trying to determine if he had other victims. "We now know even more about the danger this killer presented to the entire National Capital Region," Davis said. "Now, we know he killed in '87. He killed twice in 2002. So we're working backwards now." Edward Goldsmith was born on July 11, 1965, in Greenville to Norman Bruce Goldsmith and Mary Frances Dean Goldsmith. He grew up with 3 sisters named Bernita, Sharon, Syria, and a brother named Tony. They all shared a loving and peaceful home environment. Edward spent his entire life in Greenville, and by the age of 47, he seemed content with his life. However, there was a secretive side to him that few knew about, even his family. He was involved in drug dealing with dangerous individuals, although the extent of his involvement was unclear. This hidden aspect of his life ultimately led to his untimely death. January 9, 2013, started out like any other day for Edward. He woke up that morning without having any idea that it was going to be his last day on Earth. At some point during the day, he went to visit his niece, Shanita Goldsmith. Shanita was a family member Edward was particularly close with and was comfortable sharing details of his life with. After spending quality time with her, he bade her goodbye and took his leave. About an hour later, he called me back and was talking about the problems he was having. He said he was just tired of dealing with different people, Shanita said. After pouring out his troubles to his niece, he then hung up. That would be the last time Shanita would hear his voice. At around 10:06 p.m. on the same day, a 911 call was placed by someone who heard gunshots within the Crescent Landing apartment complex located at 1008 Whitehorse Road. A short while later, a second 911 call came in, and the person revealed that a black man was lying in the parking lot in the same area where the first caller had said that there had been gunshots. In a matter of minutes, deputies from the Greenville County Sheriff's Department got to the scene of the disturbance. And just like the second caller said, they found a black man lying on the ground of a parking lot. Upon getting closer to where he was, they realized that he was suffering from a gunshot wound and was barely alive. He was rushed to the hospital and officers were able to identify him. It was none other than Edward. My grandmother called and said my uncle had been shot and they didn't know if he was living or he was dead. Shanita said, "We immediately rushed to the hospital and at the hospital he was pronounced dead." She added, Edward's family members were devastated by this news. It was something no one had expected would happen to him. While the family were trying to come to terms with his death, the Greenville County Sheriff's Office Violent Crimes Unit was called to the scene of the crime to investigate the murder. In the course of their investigation, they were able to gather some vital information. From what they discovered, Edward had been killed by two men. The men had been at his apartment at around 10 p.m. and had gotten into an argument with him. This had escalated and the men pulled their guns out and shot at him before fleeing the scene. Finding the two unknown men became a priority for detectives, but they did not know where exactly to start looking. There were no surveillance cameras in the area that had captured the men's faces, and there was no one who could describe what they looked like. Searching for the men without solid information was like looking for a needle in a haystack, and detectives knew this. With no leads, the case grew cold. A funeral service was held for Edwards at the Watk mortuary, and his body was laid to rest. His family moved on with their lives, but with each passing day, they hoped that his killers would be caught. Within the blink of an eye, 9 years had gone by without any progress being made in the investigation of Edward's murder. According to detectives, a lack of sufficient evidence was one thing that had held back the investigation, but they held out hope that advancement in forensic science would help them solve the case. In February 2022, Edward's family was arrested for a murder. Detectives from the Greenville County Sheriff's Office revealed to the press that they had identified persons of interest in Edward's murder. However, the names of the individuals were not released to the public. Edward's family were also interviewed by the media around the time, and the pains his death brought still lingered in their hearts. To not know about what happened to our brother and who did it, that lingers on us very, very hard, Edward's sister Sharon had told the media at the time. Shanita also said the following about her uncle's murder case. "We all have hope that someday, because I believe in justice, that they'll solve the case and find out exactly who killed my uncle." In March 2022, the sheriff's office announced to the public that significant progress has been made in the investigation. Two brothers were revealed to have been behind the killing of Edwards. The first was 32-year-old Blesh's Dravius McKinney. He had been arrested and had been charged with the murder. In addition to this, he was also charged with possession of a weapon during a violent crime and criminal conspiracy. It's not clear exactly when he got arrested by the police. The second man was 29-year-old Deontay John Mel McKinney. Authorities did not have to look too far before they found him because he was serving a prison sentence at Kershaw Correctional Institution for a different crime. Deontay was also charged with the murder of Edward. After interrogating the suspects, detectives got to find out that they had killed Edward due to a disagreement over illegal narcotics. From what the detectives discovered, Edward had sold drugs to the men, but they had felt he had somehow cheated them. The McKinney brothers decided to meet up in an apartment complex and essentially lured Goldsmith there, where he was ultimately shot and killed. Greenville County Sheriff Hobart Lewis said, "Details on how exactly Detective Zarudin on the two brothers were not made public, but Sheriff Lewis pointed out that advancement in technology played a major role in helping to solve the case. Utilizing the various technological advancements, our cold case unit was able to piece together critical evidence that, along with new witness testimony, allowed them to identify the McKinney brothers as the responsible parties in Goldsmith's death," Lewis said. Betty Lou was born on June 2, 1955, to Stanley and Mildred Zukowski in Chickpea. Being an only child, she was cherished by her parents. At around 10 years old, she was in 5th grade at Ursuline Academy, an all-girls private Catholic school. Betty was known among her friends as smart, kind, funny, adventurous, and full of energy. "I first met Betty Lou at Ursuline Academy on Madison Avenue in Springfield, where we shared classrooms. Both of us were talkative and had a good sense of humor, though our jokes were sometimes misunderstood as sarcasm." In her free time, Betty preferred exploring her surroundings rather than playing with dolls at home. She had an insatiable curiosity and a naturally inquisitive mind. One of the places that interested her were some caves that were dug along the bank of the Chicopee River. Another place she was fond of exploring was Wesson Park, which was a small urban forest located at the corner of Wilbraham Road and Roosevelt Avenue. It was one of her favorite locations, and she would often take long walks with her friends around the area. Betty was enjoying every bit of her childhood and had no worries in the world. The future looked so bright for her, but things would take a dark turn. The disappearance on the evening of May 26, 1966. Betty was at home with her parents when the telephone rang. Betty answered the call and spoke with someone for a while. After the phone call, she told Mildred, her mother, that a friend had called and she was going to her place to get ice cream. Mildred did not object to this, perhaps because she was used to her daughter's wandering. In no time, Betty began to make preparations to leave home. She put on a green checkered blouse and a blue jacket. She also wore blue pants. On her feet, she had on white sneakers. After getting dressed, she said goodbye to her mother and left the house. This was around 6 in the evening, and that was the last time that her family saw her. If Mildred had known that her daughter would never make it back home alive, she would have never let her step out of the house. Minutes turned into hours, and Betty was still not back from her outing. Mildred and Stanley got increasingly worried, but kept on hoping that their daughter would step into the house at any moment, but that never happened. At around 11:15 p.m., they called the Chicopee Police Department and reported that Betty had not returned home. However, they told the police not to make a public statement because they believed that she had gone to stay with a relative or one of her friends. They went to the homes of friends and relatives which she normally frequented, but she was not there. Her friends told Lieutenant Armin Morgan of Juvenile Bureau and Detective Paul Balthazar about the caves at the bank of the Chicopee River which she liked to visit, but when officers combed through the area, they found nothing. 2 days after she went missing, police finally told the public about her disappearance. A description of the clothes she wore on the day she went missing was given out to the public. More questions were asked, and at one point, it was discovered that the friend Betty had told her mother she was going to meet was non-existent. It became obvious that she had lied so she could get out of the house, but where exactly she had gone to was a question no one could provide an answer to. They could not also figure out the individual who had called her and made her leave the house. With each passing day, everyone feared the worst. However, they kept praying that she would be found in one piece. On May 31st, 1966, 5 days after Betty went missing without a trace, a father and his 9-year-old son were out fishing on the bank of the Westfield River. This area is about 5 miles away from Betty's home, and it was well known to the residents of West Springfield. The spot where the father and son were fishing was overgrown with brush, and so was hidden from the road. A short distance away from where they were was a drainage sewer which emptied its content into the river. Suddenly, one of their lines hooked onto something in the river. It was an exciting few seconds as they tried to reel in whatever it was. They could feel that it was huge, but their excitement soon gave way to disappointments when a bunch of clothing surfaced instead of the huge fish that they had expected. At first, they thought it was a log of wood that had been covered by clothes, but after it was dragged closer to shore, they discovered that it was the body of a young girl. She was fully clothed, and there was no doubt in their minds that she was beyond saving. They were shocked by what was before them and immediately rushed to inform police about the finding. When detectives got to the scene, they secured the area and proceeded to carry out their investigation. The girl's arm and face were covered in mud and were also badly bruised. It looked like she had been beaten with something, but detectives did not want to quickly jump to conclusions before an autopsy was carried out. Soon after, the body was taken out of the area for an autopsy. Betty's parents were also informed that the girl had been found in the river and that they were asked to come down to identify the body in case it was their daughter's. When Betty's parents got the news, they hoped and prayed that it would not turn out to be her. When they finally got to where the body was laid, they discovered to their horror that it was Betty. She was in the same clothes she had worn when she left the home on the last day she was seen. Stanley and Mildred were beyond devastated, and it felt as if the world had come crashing down. The news of Betty's death spread like wildfire, and the entire community was shocked by it. Lisa, whose family had moved from Springfield to Connecticut 4 months before Betty died, also got to hear about the terrible news. I learned of Betty Lou's murder about 4 days after the discovery of her body. My family was visiting Springfield. Our moms had planned a visit for us, and our parents must have been so overwhelmed by the unbearable, unexpected horror and grief that they did not think to inform us of Betty Lou's disappearance and death, Lisa said. The result of the autopsy that was conducted on Betty's body was soon out, and according to the chief medical examiner, Dr. William Moiseenko, she had died as a result of multiple blunt force injuries to the head, a skull fracture, and terminal drowning. This suggested that she had been alive when she went into the river. Dr. Williams also revealed that she had been dead since the day she disappeared. There was also no evidence to suggest that she had been sexually molested. In the end, her death was labeled a murder, and an investigation to find her killer began in earnest. The investigation was undertaken by the Springfield Police Department, and they were also assisted by the Chicopee Police Department. In addition to this, both the Hampton County District Attorney's Office and the Massachusetts State Police also partook in the investigation. Detectives took their time to search along the shore of the river where the body was found. Divers also got into the river in search of clues, but nothing came out of these extensive searches. The part of the river where her body has been found was 10 feet deep, but despite its depth at that spot, the river was generally a slow-moving one. Due to this, detectives speculated that it was unlikely that she suffered her injuries on the bottom of the river. This meant that her killer had badly beaten her up and dumped her body into the water. Detectives also believed that Betty knew her killer based on the phone call she had received before leaving the house. During the course of interviewing her friends, families, as well as classmates, detectives got to find out something very important. Betty had been seen talking to a man in a car sometime around 6 p.m. on the day she went missing. Detectives believed that she had gotten into the vehicle of this unknown man, and he had driven her to the area where her body had been found. Through the help of several eyewitnesses, a composite sketch of the unknown man was developed. In the drawing that was made, the man wore black framed glasses and was described by the police as being 17 years of age, 5'5", weighing between 125 and 135 pounds, and had black hair and brown eyes. He was also given the name Ralph, since this was a name that was mentioned several times by Betty's friends. At the time, Captain Harold O'Connor, who was the Chicopee Detective Bureau, mentioned that he had no idea if the individual existed, and if he did, they needed the help of the community in finding him. The sketch of the man was published in newspapers with the hope that someone would recognize him and come forward to give the police some vital information. June 2nd, 1966 was the day Betty would have turned 11, but it ended up being the day she was buried. A funeral was conducted for her at the Holy Name Church in Chicopee, and several of her, as well as teachers from her school, were in attendance. Many could hardly hold back their tears as the coffin containing Betty's body was lowered into the grave. Several weeks went by after this, and Betty's killer remained at large. The investigation into the murder was leading nowhere, and soon the case went cold. In 1980, Betty's mother Mildred accidentally fell to her death from the window of the house where she resided. Some believed that she had committed suicide. The following year, Betty's father Stanley also died from an unknown cause. He was 64. In November 1997, detectives from the West Springfield Police Department suddenly got information regarding Betty's murder, and this got them excited. It's not clear what the information was or how they came upon it, but a name kept coming up in the course of their investigation. The name was Donald Mars. Detectives tried to uncover as much as they could about Donald, and when they did, it was discovered that he had been convicted in May 1995 of having sexually molested 2 children. He was charged with forcefully raping a child and indecent assault and battery on a child under 14. For the crime, he was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison and was released on probation in June 1997. In addition to this, he was also listed as a level 3 sex offender. After detectives found out all this about Donald Mars, they intensified their investigation and interviewed several witnesses. However, the evidence that they had was not solid enough to link him with Betty's death. And once again, the investigation went cold. Around 2019, the Hampton District Attorney's Office Unresolved Cases Unit was informed. It was created to review homicides that remain unsolved in Hampton County and bring renewed attention to them. Shortly after its formation, the attention of detectives from the unit was brought to Betty's murder, and they took it upon themselves to solve the case. They began working around the clock by examining past evidence. Their investigation led them once again to none other than Donald. With time, it became clear that he was really the man they had been looking for all along. Detectives, however, refused to release details on how exactly they came to finally realize that Donald had been the killer. On November 1st, 2022, Donald was charged with first-degree murder in the death of Betty. He was arrested the following day at a Veterans Administration facility in Bedford, where he was living. On November 3rd, 2022, he was arrested for murdering a woman. He appeared in a Springfield court through a video call from a call at the Hampton County Correctional Center in Ludlow. The charges were read to him, but he maintained his innocence. He was ordered to be held without bail, and the case is set to be continued in May 2023. At a news conference which followed shortly after Donald's arraignment, Hampton District Attorney Anthony Galini said the following: "Sadly, Betty Lou's parents are deceased and will not see Donald Mars answer for what we allege he did to their daughter. My office has been in contact with Betty Lou's extended family members, one of whom was a pallbearer at her funeral in 1966. While this investigation will not bring Betty Lou back to her family or grant her the opportunity to grow into a healthy adult that she and every child deserves, it is for them and for Betty Lou that we embark upon this journey of seeking justice." Andrea Nabal, a 37-year-old single mother of 2 boys, resided in Louisville, Kentucky. She had graduated from the University of Louisville and worked as an analyst for Humana, an insurance company, until she was recently laid off. In addition, her car had been totaled in a hit-and-run accident, adding to her challenges during the summer of 2019. On August 13, 2019, around 1 a.m., Andrea left her sister's home in the Audubon Park area of Louisville. She was reportedly upset following a family argument. Over the next half hour to an hour, she made several phone calls in an attempt to find a ride. Later, she was spotted walking in the 4000 block of Finn Castle Road. She has not been seen or heard from since, and her cell phone has not been active. There were several security cameras in place in the area where she was last seen, but many of them were found to be out of order when they were checked as part of the investigation into Andrea's disappearance. Andrea's family has been dedicated to the search for her, putting up flyers and going door to door, looking for potential witnesses. In addition to her family's efforts, a massive volunteer effort has been made in Andrea's case. in part due to her own efforts to help locate missing individuals. Andrea was a member of Missing in America, an organization of volunteers that helps look for individuals who have gone missing. She was an active participant in a search in Ohio just 5 months before she herself went missing. According to Nancy Schaefer-Smith, the founder of Missing in America, Andrea is the first member of the organization to go missing. Other volunteers from the group have traveled to Kentucky from all across the United States to help in the efforts to find Andrea. In addition to Andrea's fellow volunteers from Missing in America, volunteers from the Louisville community have also participated in several organized searches for her. There have been several reported sightings of her in the greater Louisville area that have caused the locations of these searches to shift. The most recent of these potential sightings, as of the making of this video, came on October 1st, 2019, when police in Clarksville, Indiana, just across the Ohio River from Louisville, announced that there had been an unconfirmed sighting of Andrea in their town. This sighting, along with all the other potential sightings of Andrea since August 13th, has not been confirmed. Due to Andrea's work with Missing in America, her family does not believe that she would willingly disappear. She was aware of how much heartache it would cause her loved ones, and of how much effort volunteers would put into looking for her. Furthermore, they argue that she could not stand to be away from her sons for this length of time. The search effort for Andrea remains active, but her disappearance remains unsolved. Michael McLean was raised in Stamford, Connecticut, and graduated from Stamford High School in 2008. Around 2012, he moved to Manchester, New Hampshire, to attend Hesser College, where he pursued a degree in criminal justice. After graduating, he decided to settle down in New Hampshire. By 2019, at the age of 29, Michael was living in Manchester and working for Easter Seals, a non-profit organization. On Saturday, April 20th, Michael went out with 2 friends to the Tropical Lounge, a nightclub located in Nashua, New Hampshire. In the early hours of April 21st, a verbal dispute between 2 women began inside the club and later escalated when they moved outside as the club closed. Michael stepped in to try to break up the altercation. Michael was not directly involved in the disagreement, but he had tried to break up a fight he witnessed at least once before. According to his family, this kind of behavior was very much in line with Michael's good-natured personality. Michael did appear to at least know one of the women involved in the altercation and had danced with her earlier in the evening. Due to the altercation, the police were called to the club's parking lot. When they arrived, the crowd scattered. At this point, Michael was separated from his friends. They looked for Michael for 45 minutes. Michael did not answer their phone calls, and his car was still parked on Orange Street, less than a mile from the club, where he had left it earlier in the evening. Michael's friends then left to return to Manchester without him. Michael's best friend and roommate, Ben Harris, was not at the apartment he shared with Michael that weekend. He had gone to Boston to celebrate Easter with his family. He therefore was not there to notice that Michael never arrived home after his night out. He did notice when Michael never came home Sunday night. Michael's family took notice when he did not return phone calls from his mother and grandmother on Easter Sunday. His job took notice on Monday morning when the usually dependable Michael did not show up for work. He was reported missing to the police on Monday, April 22nd. There has been no activity on his social media or financial accounts since he went missing. According to police, Michael left the club at approximately 1:45 a.m. Mike placed a phone call to his boss, during which he told her, "They're after me, more than one." It would not have been unusual for Michael to call his boss if he were in trouble. He had a good relationship with her and had called her before in situations where he needed a ride or was having trouble with his car. The call disconnected after 2 minutes. Michael's boss immediately tried calling him back, but Michael did not answer. She sent him texts at 154 and 218, but he did not respond to either of them. She made one more attempt to call him at 225, but he again did not answer the phone. While Michael was not replying to his boss, his phone was sending out texts during this time. He sent a series of texts to one of his neighbors, but not all of them make sense. Michael's father believes that it is possible that at least some of these texts were the result of the text-to-speech function on Michael's phone, meaning that Michael did not mean to send the texts, but his phone transcribed words or sounds it recorded him saying. Eldridge is the name of a small side street not far from the tropical lounge that Michael may have run down while trying to get away from the individuals who were chasing him, but by the time he sent the text referencing it, he would most likely not have been near that street, because other evidence places him at a different location. The last text message Michael received on his phone came in at 2:27 a.m., and the phone was last pinged at 2:30 a.m. At this time, the phone was at a McDonald's on East Hollis Street, less than half a mile down the street from the Tropical Lounge. The police were able to confirm that Michael was actually at the restaurant through witness statements from McDonald's employees and an acquaintance of Michael's who saw him there, past 2:30 a.m., most likely because his battery had died. Surveillance footage next shows Michael at a Speedway gas station further down East Hollis Street. Inside the gas station, Michael asked if he could use their phone. It is unclear if he actually made a call there. Michael's father went to speak with the employee who had been working at the gas station that night, but he was not able to follow basic conversation or provide coherent answers to questions. Mr. McLean believed the employee had some sort of substance abuse problem. The last known footage of Michael was taken at 3:30 a.m. Michael was picked up by multiple cameras at the residences at Riverfront Landing, a new condo complex on Bancroft Street, a side street off of East Hollis, further east from the Speedway and McDonald's. The last time Michael is seen on video, he was exiting the complex. Michael being there confirms that he was continuing to head east on Hollis Street. It is unclear why Michael went off the main road and into the condo complex. If he had stayed on Hollis, he would have had to go over a bridge, but the bridge did have a sidewalk and lighting, so he could have done so. Michael's father believes that his son may have walked into the complex to try to trick someone following him into thinking that he lived in the complex and was going inside his residence. The Nashua police claim that no one was following Michael that night, but his parents are not fully convinced of this. The fact that Michael told his boss that he was being chased right after leaving the club seems to indicate that he ran into trouble there. An ex-boyfriend of the woman Michael had been dancing with had reportedly been at the Tropical Lounge that night, providing a potential motive for someone to go after Michael. Given the fact that Michael was last seen on surveillance footage near a river, there is a possibility that he accidentally fell into the water, but this seems unlikely. There were multiple obstacles between where Michael was last seen and the river, including a dry well and a wooded area. Furthermore, Michael would have had to go up a grassy hill, slick from recent rain, in order to go towards the water. From there is a section of river rock and then a section of small boulders that Michael would have had to get over in order to get into the water. It is unclear exactly why Michael kept walking east on Hollis Street. Hollis is a main street and was relatively well lit, so if Michael was being followed, it would make sense for him to stay on that street. He may also have gone into the McDonald's because it was one of the few places in the neighborhood that was open 24 hours, and he felt safe waiting out the individuals who were following him there. It is unclear why he did not call his friends to come meet him and why he continued east when his phone died, and he needed to make a call. My personal theory is that Michael mistakenly believed that he was walking back to his car, even though in reality he was walking away from it. To get from where Michael parked his car on Orange Street to the Tropical Lounge, he had to cross a bridge over the Nashua River. Michael was not familiar with Nashua and had not spent a lot of time there. I believe it is possible that Michael may have asked someone on the street, or at the McDonald's, or in the Speedway, for directions on how to get to the bridge, not knowing that there was more than one bridge nearby. This theoretical person may have told Michael to keep going east on Hollis, where there was another bridge going over the Merrimack River, assuming that this was the bridge Michael was asking about. It was near this bridge that Michael was last seen on surveillance footage. No one has ever come forward saying that they had such a conversation with Michael. This is purely a theory on my part. I believe it explains why Michael was not trying to get a hold of the friends he had been at the club with while he still had power on his phone. He believed that he was close to his vehicle, which meant that he believed he was close to safety and his means to get home. While this theory may explain some of Michael's behavior during the early morning hours of Easter Sunday 2019, it does not explain what happened to him after he walked out of the condo complex on Bancroft Street. But that mystery still remains, despite the best efforts of Michael's dedicated family. Gene Johnson, aged 70, lived in a secluded area of Capitan, New Mexico. She had moved there from Ruidoso, New Mexico, where the rest of her family resided after her husband passed away. Jean cherished her late husband's memory, wearing his ashes in a clear pendant around her neck and keeping her wedding band on. Even though he had passed away nearly 8 years earlier, she was reluctant to start dating again, despite her daughter Heidi's encouragement. Jean and Heidi shared a very close bond, speaking on the phone multiple times a day. On Sunday, May 26, 2019, Jean sent Heidi a picture of a dog she was looking after for a friend. This turned out to be the last communication Heidi received from her mother. Heidi had a busy work day on Monday the 27th, so she did not get a chance to try to call her mother until the early evening. Jean did not answer. Heidi tried calling again on Tuesday, but Jean still did not pick up the phone, which was unusual. Heidi was becoming concerned, and these concerns were validated shortly after her Tuesday call to her mother when she received a phone call from the friend Jean had been dog-sitting for. Jean and her friend had planned for Jean to drop the dog off at the friend's house on Monday, the day they returned from their trip. Jean had not shown up to bring back the dog. Heidi drove half an hour to her mother's home. The gate at the beginning of the long driveway was locked, and Jean's car was in the driveway. Her cell phone and purse were locked inside of it. The one real sign of trouble was the fact that the front door of the house was slightly open. The dog Jean had been watching was still inside the house. It had several accidents in the house, indicating that it had not been let outside in some time. According to Heidi, Jean loved this dog and would not have left it on its own for such a long time, willingly. Only one item in Jean's home seemed out of place. It was initially believed that Jean's .357 pistol was missing because it was not in her hope chest where it was normally kept. However, it was found inside of a pouch on top of a pile of laundry. Jean had packed up the laundry to take it to Heidi's house that week. According to Heidi, Jean did not use the pistol recreationally and only had it for protection. She would only have taken it out if she thought there was a mountain lion too close to her property, or if someone had shown up at her house and she had reason to fear them. Police searched Jean's 10-acre property with the aid of helicopters, drones, and tracking dogs. They found nothing and had to expand their search area. Still, they found no sign of Jean. Heidi has organized several of her own searches, with volunteers on ATVs and horseback, covering large tracts of remote land. Desperate for any possible leads, Heidi has also consulted several psychics for help. They have all told her that her mother is no longer alive. Despite the lack of new information in her mother's case, Heidi continues her efforts to find her. Her next large-scale search for Jean is scheduled for October 26th. Ruth Baumgartner, a 22-year-old senior at Ohio Wesleyan University in Delaware, Ohio, was studying art and was a member of the Delta Delta, or Tri-Delt sorority. Her sorority sisters would later recount being the last to see her alive. On the evening of May 4, 1937, Ruth attended a singing competition practice with her Tri-Delt sisters at their sorority house. Afterward, she returned to her dormitory to study for an upcoming test. In letters to her parents, Ruth had expressed feeling tired and overwhelmed recently. Despite this, her sorority sisters noted that she appeared to be in good spirits during the singing practice. She was still in a good mood around 11 that night when she stopped in to talk with some of her sorority sisters in the dorm's smoking lounge. Ruth said goodnight to the other Tri-Delts just before midnight. Her hair had already been pinned up in curlers, and she was wearing her pajamas and bathrobe, so they had no reason to believe she was going anywhere else but to bed. The following day, Ruth did not show up for dinner, which was unusual. When her friends and sorority sisters began trying to figure out if anyone had seen her that day, they realized that Ruth had not gone to any of her classes or shown up to take the exam she had been studying for the previous night. At 10:30 p.m., the Tri-Delts notified university officials that Ruth was missing. The university first contacted Ruth's parents to make sure she had not simply returned to her hometown of Lakewood, Ohio. She had not. Her parents were alarmed and traveled to the campus to help look for their daughter. Mrs. Baumgartner went through her daughter's dorm room and determined that the only missing clothing items were a brown suit, hat, and shoes. A recently purchased overnight bag was missing as well. The pajamas and robe Ruth had last been seen wearing were hung up in the room, and her hairpins and curlers had been put away. Ruth's dorm room was room 319, one of the few single rooms in Austin Hall. The room was left perfectly clean and organized, which was apparently not how Ruth usually kept it. Ruth's watch, change purse, and sorority pin had all been left behind. Ruth's key to the room, as well as her identification, was found placed on the back corner of a staircase in Austin Hall, between the second and third floors. Ruth's bright red Dodge convertible, which had been an early graduation gift from her father, was found at the garage where she kept it, with the keys left in the ignition. Ruth's sorority sisters essentially formed their own detective agency, canvassing campus hangouts and questioning taxi drivers and train conductors in the area. Police searched a nearby quarry where Ruth liked to go to study, and a massive ground search covered the campus and the surrounding areas. No further clues were found. Ruth's parents originally feared that she was suffering from amnesia, brought on from all the stress she was under. She had told them that she didn't have enough time to do everything she needed to do and fulfill all of her obligations. Ruth was also concerned that she wouldn't have enough credit hours to graduate on time. She was scheduled to graduate just a few weeks after her disappearance. The possibility that Ruth had been abducted could not immediately be dismissed, however, due in part to the fact that Ruth's father was a wealthy manufacturer and she disappeared during the Great Depression. If other people on campus were not aware of Mr. Baumgartner's wealth early on in Ruth's time at Ohio Wesleyan, they certainly would have realized it shortly before Ruth went missing when she brought her brand new convertible to campus. No ransom calls were ever received, however. A witness came forward with an account that could potentially support either of these theories. A woman living near the Olentangy River, not far from the Ohio Wesleyan campus, said that she heard 3 screams sometime between 2 and 3 a.m. on May 5th. This could have been Ruth struggling against an abductor. However, the witness said that the screams sounded like they were coming from a hysterical person, so they could have been coming from Ruth in the middle of a mental break. In either of these scenarios, it appears that Ruth left her dorm room willingly, as there was no sign of a struggle inside of it. If she had been abducted, her abductor would have needed to lure her outside. In the weeks before she went missing, Ruth had received numerous calls on the dorm's communal phone from an unknown man. On several occasions, other students living in the dorm had answered the phone. They described the man on the other end of the line as having a high-pitched voice. Ruth was not always in the building and available to come to the phone, but she is known to have taken at least 2 of these calls and seemed happy after speaking to the unknown. This, of course, led to speculation that Ruth had run off with a secret boyfriend. Ruth's family and friends rejected this theory because she was happily engaged to a man named Bud Moorback in Lakewood. There were several unconfirmed sightings of Ruth alone in Delaware and other nearby cities in the days after she went missing, but there were also unconfirmed sightings of her hitchhiking with a young man, leaving open the possibility that Ruth had chosen to be with a man her parents may not have approved of and left her life behind to be with him. However, she would have had at most only about $5, roughly $87 in today's money, when she left. Alternatively, she could have thought she was running away with someone she loved, but the person she was meeting actually had criminal intentions. News of Ruth's disappearance spread across the country, and potential sightings of her were called in from seemingly every state. The notoriety of Ruth's case did complicate it because it brought forth leads from people just looking to entangle themselves in the popular news story. At least one woman on the East Coast, and possibly a second, went to the police, falsely claiming to be Ruth. In 1938, Booker Johnson, who was being charged in an unrelated crime, claimed to know what happened to Ruth in a bid to get a reduced sentence. He claimed that he and his 3 co-defendants in the case had picked up Ruth, who had thought she was going out on a date with one of the men. They then drugged her and trafficked her. This story was revealed to be a lie when authorities realized that Johnson and the other 3 men he implicated in his story had all been incarcerated on the day Ruth went missing, and had been for some time prior to it as well as for some time after it. In 1939, Ruth's parents asked that the official police investigation be closed. This decision opened the Baumgartner family up to suspicion and speculation. Rumors flew that Ruth had been discovered, married to someone of a lower social status and therefore disowned, or, more popularly, that her parents had her institutionalized for some sort of mental health issue and did not want anyone to find out. In a 1940 article in which she discussed the toll not knowing where Ruth was continued to have on her parents, Ruth's sister dismissed these allegations. The Baumgartners had hired the Burns Detective Agency to look for Ruth. It is possible that they were simply unhappy with the lack of results in the formal investigation, and did not want police interfering with the investigation of the private detectives. Ruth's mysterious disappearance still remains unsolved. Trisha Ritler was a bright and affectionate 19-year-old freshman at Indiana Wesleyan University in Marion, Indiana. She was studying psychology with the goal of one day helping to mend fractured families. On March 29, 1993, a surprisingly warm day in Marion, Trisha, who loved running, went for 2 separate runs to enjoy the weather. That evening, she dedicated her time to writing a term paper in her dorm room. Around 8 p.m., Trisha took a break from her studies and decided to walk to Marsh supermarket, which was just half a mile away. There, she purchased a root beer and a magazine. She then began the walk back to her dorm room in Bowman Hall. She never arrived. Trisha's clothes, stained with blood, were eventually discovered roughly halfway between the store and her dorm building, in a tree in a grassy area. An earring and a small amount of blood was found on a nearby sidewalk. A search was launched to find her, with the effort including fellow students from the university. Search dogs were also brought in to look for Trisha, but Trisha's father Gary believes that Trisha's active lifestyle may have rendered the dogs less useful than they ordinarily would have been. Because Trisha ran so frequently, and the search area was so close to where she lived and went to school, her scent was everywhere because she went for runs all around the area. Investigators believe that 6 or 7 people had been playing basketball on a court near where Trisha went missing, but none of those individuals ever came forward or provided information. The search effort and police investigation did not locate Trisha. Over the years, multiple suspects have been considered in Trisha's disappearance. One of those suspects did confess to involvement in Trisha's case, Larry Dwayne Hall, who but has confessed to 30 others. Most of those confessions were ultimately recanted. I have previously covered Hall in relation to the disappearance of Lori Deppis. Like in Lori's case, Hall had newspaper clippings and notes about Trisha's disappearance in his vehicle. Like in Lori's case, he confessed and offered to tell authorities where she was buried, but a search of that area, in Trisha's case, near a reservoir in Grant County, Indiana, found nothing. Hall later recanted his confession in Trisha's case. In 2017, he admitted to retired Marion police detective J.K. that he made up the confession to get attention. No physical evidence has ever been found to link Hall to Trisha's disappearance. 5 years after Trisha went missing, a red sunset maple tree was planted in her memory in Sable Park, near where she vanished. To mark the 25th anniversary of her disappearance, a memorial was constructed on the Indiana Wesleyan campus. Trisha's parents and 3 siblings still go out to dinner every year on February 9th to mark Trisha's birthday. While they do not believe that she is alive, they still hope to be able to find Trisha and give her a proper burial, both so that they will have some answers about what happened to her, and so that they will have a place to go to remember her beyond the memorial on campus. By December 22, 1975, most of the students at Illinois State University in Normal, Illinois, had already gone home for winter break. 21-year-old Carol Rolfstad, however, had not yet gone back to her family home in Elk Grove Village just outside of Chicago. She had a job in a clothing store near campus and wanted to work a few more shifts during the pre-Christmas rush. After work that day, Carol stopped at a bar to meet a friend. They did not stay very long because Carol was traveling back to Elk Grove Village that night. Carol and her friend left the bar together and began walking home. Their routes diverged along the way, with Carol heading to the Delta Zeta sorority house. She never made it inside. The following day, around noon, Carol was discovered unconscious outside of the sorority house, badly beaten. It was estimated that she had been there for 12 hours. She was rushed to the hospital, but passed away the following day, Christmas Eve, due to the head injuries she had sustained. Police could not find an obvious motive. There was still money in Carol's purse, and she had not been sexually assaulted. 2 members of Carol's sorority had been inside the house that night, but reported that they had not seen or heard anything out of the ordinary. An 18-inch long railroad tie was found near the house and was hypothesized to be the murder weapon. The sorority house was close to train tracks, so it could have been a weapon of relative opportunity. A witness came forward saying that they had driven by the sorority house around 10 p.m. on the night of December 22nd and had seen 2 white men, one of whom was carrying a club outside of it. The witness was able to help develop a sketch of one of the 2 men. They believed him to be between the ages of 18 and 25. Carol's murder was not, unfortunately, her first encounter with violence at the sorority house. On July 16, 1974, at approximately 3 a.m., a man cut the sorority house's phone line and entered the house via a fire escape. He began strangling Carol, but she was able to fight him off enough to get out a scream. He then threw her against a chest of drawers and ran out of the house. Carol suffered a broken nose from being thrown, but was not otherwise seriously injured. She was unable to provide a description of her attacker because it had been dark in her room, and he was never identified. An arrest was made in Carol's case in 1977. The suspect, who had a long history of mental illness, confessed to the crime. However, he later recanted that confession, and the charges against him were dropped. In 2001, evidence from Carol's case was sent to the FBI laboratory for new testing. Fingerprints were discovered on one of the items that had been sent. What that item was exactly has not been publicly disclosed, and the normal police have only identified it as a personal item that belonged to Carol. The unknown fingerprints did not match any in the FBI database. They were compared to at least one suspect the normal police were considering, but again, there was not a match. Carol's case remains unsolved, but is still an open investigation. Holly Grimm was born to Jeanette and Richard Grimm in 1972. She developed a passion for bowling during her teenage years and frequently played on weekends with friends. A dedicated Dale Earnhardt fan, she worked in Allen, Oregon, near Macungie, Pennsylvania. Holly had a close bond with her mother, often speaking on the phone before heading to work. They both lived in the Red Maple Trailer Park, and although Holly didn't know many neighbors, she was particularly close to Tammy. Holly and Tammy often coordinated dropping their kids off at the school bus stop together in the mornings. On the morning of November 22, 2013, Jeanette became anxious when Holly didn't answer her calls, which she tried 3 times. She drove over to Holly's trailer and saw that Holly's car was still in the driveway. She had a key for Holly's trailer, so she flung open the door and was stunned as there was complete silence. When she walked inside, she observed a coffee mug on the floor and an ashtray on its side beside the couch, and immediately felt a chill run down her spine. She was stunned when she discovered that Holly's asthma inhaler was still on the nightstand. She knew that Holly never left the house without her inhaler. As quickly as she could, she left the trailer. As soon as she re-entered the vehicle, she sensed that something was awry. She went to Holly's boyfriend's house in the hopes of finding her there. But when he informed Jeanette that he hadn't really seen Holly recently, things became more serious. Jeanette heard it and was silent. Something suddenly entered her thoughts. She phoned Holly's office in some hope, but she was informed that Holly had never shown up for work, and had also never called to let anybody know she would be on a break. Jeanette was worried as many unwanted views were emerging in her mind. She immediately contacted the Macungie Police Department as she was left with no option. The police arrived quickly, and without wasting a second, Jeanette briefed them on everything and gave them Holly's trailer keys. Holly's car keys were on the floor by the front entrance, and her glasses were on the coffee table when the officers entered the trailer. As they looked around the trailer, they saw a coffee stain that was still damp. A lone black button was discovered as well, which went with nothing in Holly's wardrobe when they checked. As they looked around some more, they saw that the rear door of the trailer was open and that there was no evidence of forced entry. But there was a brilliant crimson stain outside the entrance. After being tested, it was revealed to be human DNA, but it wasn't Holly's. The forensic examiner said the fact that it hadn't been exposed to any changes in its surroundings suggests that it was only recently left on the door, which was useful information. When police told Jeanette about this, she said that Holly never left the home that way and that the back door was always closed. It was clear to the police that the trailers were packed in closely together. They decided to find out whether or not any of their neighbors had noticed anything unusual. The policeman approached the trailers close to Holly's and started questioning the residents there. Holly's close friend Tammy was the first to speak with the police because of their strong friendship. Tammy told the police that, as always, she and Holly waited for the bus together that morning. Tammy said that after dropping their kids to the bus stop and the light conversation, the two of them then went their separate ways to their trailers. After that, Holly went to her car and got in. But just after a minute, Holly got out of her vehicle and walked towards her trailer as if she had heard something. She then stopped and turned her head as if she had heard something behind her trailer. She looked for it but seemed to see nothing. After a while, Tammy came out and heard a loud thud coming from Holly's trailer. Holly's vehicle was still in the driveway, which was out of the ordinary given that Holly always departed for work before she did. Despite these strange events, she did not take any action or notify anyone. When the police couldn't find Holly's phone, they called AT&T for assistance. The company said that Jeanette had called Holly 3 times, as she had already told the police. They said that the phone was still active and indicated that Holly was heading northeast. But after that point, they were unable to determine the phone's location. According to them, maybe it was turned off. Maybe it was destroyed. The police now decided to go in depth into Holly's life. When they went to Allen, Oregon, where Holly worked, everyone was shocked about what happened to Holly. But when they questioned some of Holly's co-workers, they informed them about something strange. They told the police that their colleague, Michael Horvath, was running very late that morning. According to them, Michael Horvath was very punctual. The police then decided to look for Michael. But when they took an in-depth look at his life, many strange things emerged. Michael G. Horvath was born in 1967. In 2013, he was living in Ross Township, McConkey. He lived with his wife named Kathy. According to the locals of Ross Township, Michael was very mysterious. He was a very strange type of character in the office too. Michael had also cheated on his wife with a woman named Nicole. He had met her on an online website in July 2013. She claimed that she never developed romantic feelings for Michael, despite their frequent online conversations. They had only met once in person, but she had felt uneasy around him even then. She declined his invitation the next time because she had plans to accompany her husband to the mall the next day. Michael made a weird remark in response, telling her that he would follow them around the mall. After all this, she was still in touch with him. On the morning that Holly vanished, he had even given her a call. Michael also had a farm bordered by forests, and he often went into them to hunt deer. He even had a trailer in the woods that was soundproof, and had a winch on it to skin and cut off animals. Michael was not a fan of serial killer shows until the debut of Dexter on television. Like Dexter, Michael wanted to be a serial murderer. He really admired the character of Dexter. The series finale aired in September of 2013. 2 months after the series finale aired, Holly Grimm went missing from her trailer. The police questioned Michael for the first time. When the police saw Michael walk into the interrogation room, they decided he wasn't a big threat. They saw him as a balding and overweight man who was restless. The police only questioned him about his tardiness to work that day. He said that on his way to work, his car got a flat tire. So he pulled over to an off-ramp to inflate it so he could go home and change it. Holly's trailer was located 2.5 miles from the off-ramp. Michael then drove home to change the tire and then drove back to his workplace. This is why he arrived late to work that day. They were unable to hold him due to a lack of evidence. In the end, they did nothing and let him go. In March of 2014, after working for more than 20 years, Michael decided to leave his job at Allen, Oregon. The police were still in the search of the missing Holly Grimm, and when they heard about Michael leaving his job, they decided to keep an eye on him. Finally, in August of 2015, police spoke with Michael's wife, Kathy. They talked to her about the day Holly Graham went missing. She said that when she arrived home from work, she found Michael's dirty shoes in the bedroom and the lights on, and thus, it was established that Michael had missed a day of work. She added more in her statement and said that she had seen Michael doing something in the but she wasn't sure what he was actually doing. Not long after that, Kathy was rummaging around in the garbage when she came upon a bottle of chloroform. She also discovered the date books he used to keep track of Holly's whereabouts. When she found them, she was completely broken, but she confessed all this to the police. But even after all this, she was certain Michael was innocent and incapable of committing a crime like murder. In March 2016, the police came up with an idea. They left a paper message on Michael's truck's windshield. The message implied that they were aware of what he did to Holly Grimm. They were hoping that maybe Michael would be so frightened that he'd visit the place he had put Holly, but nothing like this happened. They again interviewed Michael in September of 2016. In this interview, he came clean about having delivered some products to Holly's house in 2012. He sold a dryer and washer to her. The police were also able to take a blood sample of Michael. They took a blood sample from him because he claimed to have been hurt while retrieving the washer and dryer. But thanks to the great lab work, they were able to determine that the blood on the door was recent, not of years ago. When the DNA results came back, they confirmed that the blood on Holly's trailer's back door belonged to him. This was enough for the police to get a warrant to search his home. They knew that what they were going to uncover would be disturbing. At first, the area of his farm was combed through. During their investigation, the cops came upon a shallow embankment. Small bone fragments and a couple of rib bones were discovered there. Furthermore, they discovered a fragment of scapula that had what seemed to be a gunshot wound. They suspected he had dug up the bones and torched them in a fire pit on his land. The digger who made the discovery informed the police that he suspected some of the dirt and pebbles covering the remains had been brought in from elsewhere. The forensics team confirmed that Holly's remains were among those analyzed. It took many days to search his house completely. They discovered a diary where Holly, her child, her boyfriend, and every movement of their day-to-day life was recorded. The notebook even included the on-off times of Holly's kitchen, bedroom, and bathroom lights. Loud sounds from within Holly's trailer would likewise be noted. What followed was far creepier. He'd drawn a map of all the shadowy spots in the area around Holly's trailer. He even had pictures of Holly from where he'd gone to her home to deliver the products. Police also discovered photos of Holly's bedroom. They were taken from when he had entered the trailer while Holly was not home. It wasn't over yet. The diary also tracked the whereabouts of other women, including a high school student he had been pursuing. They discovered lock-picking tools that he had used to get inside the trailer. They also found multiple pairs of handcuffs, a bottle of chloroform, and stun guns. A gun which police believed to be the murder weapon was also discovered. Among his possessions, law enforcement discovered disturbing images of women being rendered, which was titled Hunting Humans. Holly's mother, Jeanette, raised Holly's child, but she passed away in March 2017 after Holly's body was found. She found her daughter, which must have brought her some solace, but she did not live to see justice rendered. The trial of Michael Gene Horvath finished in June 2022 with a guilty verdict. The prosecution was seeking the death sentence, but it took another 3 months for the final sentence. On September 8, 2022, Michael Horvath was sentenced to life in prison in Monroe County. After hearing the sentence, Michael said, "I am sorry for their loss, but Judge, I did not commit this murder and I am going to fight this till the end." What do you think of the sentence of Michael Horvath? And what are your views on the final statement of Michael?